You're listening to The Q Switch with your host, Spence.
Welcome, one and all, to the Q Switch Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Spence, and the mission of this show is to tackle subjects currently impacting ophthalmology and pull in leading eye care professionals and industry players to discuss their unique perspectives. Let's jump right in. Joining me today is Dr. John Kitchens, a nationally recognized retina specialist who practices in Louisville at Retina Associates of Kentucky. In addition, he is a professional photographer, videographer, and has harnessed the power of artificial intelligence. He's combined these passions in ways that are not only transforming how his clinic operates, but also redefining what it means to deliver excellent patient care. Doc, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Spence. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into our topic of leveraging AI to optimize your ophthalmic practice, I'll have you talk a little about your exploration into AI technology and what clicked for you to integrate it into your retina practice.
Well, yeah, I tell you, Spence, it's hard to believe that just about 2 years ago, I was going to one of my satellite clinics, and I showed up eight in the morning and walk in the door, and we have a lot of great people that work with us, but I had two of my top scribes there, Tony and Matt. And we're talking, and after about 5 minutes, Matt said, "Hey, have you seen this thing where you can just type something in and it will make a picture of it?" And I was like, "No, that doesn't really exist." And he's like, No, look, it's this real thing." And he pulled up on his phone and he showed it to me. And I remember just being amazed because as somebody who loves photography, I love imagery, and I feel like I'm a pretty creative guy. This was like, my mind just went crazy thinking, what can I do with this? And actually, it was Dolly at the time. It was the first time I'd had or seen Dolly. And so I immediately was hooked when I saw that. And I could have never imagined what this could have evolved to in such a short period of time. You know, after playing with Dolly for a while, it seemed like within a month or two, I discovered ChatGPT. And then and it was in its very earliest stages. And I just could not believe that you could type something in and get answers back as if you were talking to a semi-sentient, person. And then once again, I couldn't believe just how fast it's progressed. And so, I've been someone who's constantly been kind of exploring and online. When I get home at night, I'll sit with my laptop on the couch and I'll just pull up different things. I love YouTube and watching YouTubers who talk about different AI platforms. And so I've just kind of followed this evolution. And as it's progressed, I've started to find ways that specifically ChatGPT, but Claude, Gemini, some of the other AI platforms could actually help me work better, work more efficiently, work more intelligently, and then started to just kind of explore, like, what are some other things that this could do that could really change our practice? And so it was kind of that process of saying, hey, wait a second, if it can do this, then maybe it can also do this, and trying it and seeing and trying to figure out how to prompt it. And I give talks on AI for medicine, but what I don't speak about, but I should, is prompt engineering, and what AIs do you use, and what types of things, how do you ask questions to get the right answers?
Well, it would be great to maybe have you show an example of what could be done with AI. Do you have any projects you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can show a couple of things that we can do. One of the things that's really interesting is using AI to help with patient education. So I love when I have a patient that comes in and has a kind of a tough diagnosis, something that maybe they may struggle to find a lot of information out there on. And I found that ChatGPT, or any AI client for that matter, can actually do a really good job. And what I'll ask it to do is I'll say, hey, this patient has whatever condition. One that's unusual is called paracentral acute middle maculopathy, well written about, but not very digestible for patients. And I'll just ask ChatGPT, hey, I've got a patient with this condition. Can you make a 2-page handout for the patient explaining their condition, some of the risk factors for the condition, and just giving them some brief information about it? And within seconds, I have something that I can copy to a Word file, print it out there, and have something to give out to that patient. And I think patients really appreciate that. Instead of, saying, hey, Google it or whatever, because I can then proofread it. I can change what I think needs to be changed. I've used this for complicated conditions like Pam. I've used it for things like a handout for dry eye, something that
Hmm.
we very commonly encounter in retina clinics, that can explain dry eye the way I would like it explained. We use it sometimes. I use it sometimes for literature searches. If I want to stay up to date on certain topics, or if I'm giving a talk on something, I'll utilize AI to actually do some of the research for me. You do need to proofread all of it and check your sources, because you can still get hallucinations with
Hmm.
AI, which is where the AI will give you false information. But if you're pretty knowledgeable about something, I think you can proofread these things and pretty much know if it's on point or not. And if it doesn't sound right, then you go fact check it.
Hmm.
But beyond that, I feel like it's a pretty powerful type thing. And used it for things like I put in half a day's worth of schedule, and I've said, hey, if you were to, remake this schedule, how would you do it so it's more efficient? And it went through my schedule and it very logically laid out how to do my schedule better. So it's just a really limitless sort of thing when you start to look at what it's able to do. And I would say, like, anything that you think about and say, I would like to better understand this, or I'd like to, prepare this, or I'd like to analyze this data, think about using AI, because it can make your life a lot easier.
Hmm. Well, we're going to dive into all that. So this is a great jumping off point. So let's start big picture. AI has gone from basically science fiction to clinical tool in just a few short years, as you just mentioned. From your perspective, how is AI already being used in ophthalmology, both in and out of the exam lane?
Yeah, so outside of the exam lane, I think I alluded to a couple of things like actually making handouts for patients, researching different conditions. I use it actually to tell me what studies are available for
Oh.
patients, especially patients with inherited retinal diseases. There's so many different inherited retinal diseases, different genetic problems that can cause inherited retinal diseases, that if I have a patient that we've done genetic testing on, it's much easier than to search the web or go to clinicaltrials.gov and try to look through and navigate that website, to be able to just say to ChatGPT, hey, I have a patient who has these mutations, or this condition with these mutations. What studies are they eligible for? And it will go out and canvass the internet, and
Wow.
it will come back and give you a really concise summary of some of the potential clinical trials, not just ones that are enrolling, but it actually somehow finds some that might be on the docket going forward that haven't started yet. So it's incredible and saves a lot of that legwork from that standpoint. Inside the exam room, and once again, we're talking just about commercially available AI. I use it a lot as a translator for patients. It's
Hmm.
really great to have a patient that doesn't natively speak English, and you just push on the voice a version of the ChatGPT on your phone, and you can actually talk to it like a person, and it'll talk back to you. And you just simply say, "Hey, ChatGPT, I want you to serve as a translator. Anytime you hear English, translate it to Spanish. Anytime you hear Spanish, translate it to English, and then give me a transcript of what was said at the end of this." And
That's
it will
amazing.
do it, and it will do it amazingly well. And so it saved me from having to get a translator and bring in a translator. Always asking the patient, hey, is it okay if I use this, device to help translate? And the patients here never mind. They say sure. But it's a pretty amazing thing. One of the things that really shocked me, Spence, was I had a patient one time that had a very unusual condition, young fella, and I said, this is what I think you have based off your OCT scan. But if you don't mind, I've been doing a lot with AI lately. Would you care if I just took a picture of your scans, wouldn't have any of your identifying information on it, and uploaded it to ChatGPT and see if it agrees with my diagnosis? And so he said, yeah, sure, that'd be great, do it. So I took a picture of the screen of the computer that had his scans on it, and I said, hey, this is a 46-year-old guy that has this condition, or has this finding on his OCT. What do you think it is? And you know what, it came back with the same diagnosis that I had made, and gave us some additional information about it and some testing that could be done. And I was like, okay, this is much, much better than I could have imagined. And I think if it's something that on a tough to diagnose patient, it's coming up with the same diagnosis and actually gave me a couple other things in the differential, I feel pretty strongly that it's got a very bright future from that standpoint. Where it's going to go is really interesting because right now we don't have any AI that integrates with our electronic health records or with our imaging. But I really think one of the things that we struggle with is to get a global perspective of how a patient's doing.
Global.
Yeah, to be able to realize, like, as we're treating patients with macular degeneration or diabetic retinopathy, they're coming in every month or every other month to get injections in their eyes. And we try to taper them off the shots or back off on their injections. But you can treat some of these patients for years. And to be able to look back and have something that can concisely kind of summarize the course of that patient over a couple of years and give recommendations for best treatment options for that patient, maybe when to switch medicines or when to consider extending the patient or when to consider treating them more often, more frequently.
So would you
That
consider
is
AI more of a partner, a backup, or maybe like just a second opinion with a chip on its shoulder?
I think that it can be like a tremendous assistant, almost like for a lawyer, like a paralegal.
Oh, okay.
We've got the knowledge, but what it can do is say, hey, here's the entire case file. And I can summarize it for you and synthesize all of the information from the patient's past and give you hints, where if you say, hey, I think we should, Spence, you're doing great. You've been on these shots every 8 weeks. Let's take you out to 10. And it may say, oh, wait a second. Remember, you tried that 6 months ago and it didn't work. And you
Huh.
tried that before a year ago and it didn't work. And you tried that a year and a half ago before and it didn't work. So why do you really think it's a good idea to do it now? And I'll have patients that actually say that, where you'll have seen them and you're looking visit to visit and you're not able to look back 5, 6, 7 visits ago.
Hmm.
And you'll say, Spence, you're doing great. Let's take you out to 10 weeks. And you'll say, you've done that 3 times before. And every time I get worse, can you just keep me on the shots every 8 weeks? And then you're kind of embarrassed because it's like, oh my gosh, how did I not remember that? But you can't look through every piece of information on every
Hmm.
patient and every scan, but AI can.
So here's the tricky part. When should clinicians trust AI and when should we be more cautious? How do you strike the right balance between, say, relying on AI and applying human clinical judgment?
Yeah, so I think that it depends on the task that you're asking AI to do.
Okay.
So if you're asking AI, hey, listen, go and, you know, collate OCT information, data points on a scan, and basically create a graph that shows those points over time and put injections on there. I think you can trust that because you're asking it to go out and grab this piece of data and put it into a graph format. That's a very simplistic task. That I think you can trust. But if you're asking AI, hey, AI, I want you to go out and find this information on the web and put this information together, I think you have to be skeptical because you don't know where the AI is drawing from that information. It's really when you know where the information is coming from and you have control over that, like OCT scans, visual acuity, injections, you can pretty much trust if the source of the information is the information AI is going to give you is going to be reliable if you're asking it to just document. But if
Okay.
you're saying go to the web and find me stuff, you don't know where it's going to draw its information from. So I think you have to read that with some skepticism and some thought as you look at it. Now, the next step is going to be, okay, how do we ask AI to synthesize recommendations for best treatment? And I don't think we're there yet. And I don't know
Hmm.
that we want to go there yet. I think we want it to accumulate vast amounts of information on our patients to be able to help us better treat them, know historically how they've done so that we can predict how they're going to do in the future. But I think we still, with that information, want to be the ones who are making the judgment call because that involves so many different things. It involves talking to the patient. It involves hearing from the family members about what the patient's experience has been with the treatments, and then taking all of that information into account.
So you mentioned that when you give it a task to go search for something and it may, spit out some erroneous information that they almost like you said, I think you called it, you called it hallucination. Was that what you're speaking to? Those hallucinations?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Hallucinations where it goes and it either makes up data or it finds data somewhere that's just not consistent with reality.
And that brings me to something that I'm really curious about, because when you're using AI in the exam room or maybe behind the scenes, how do you communicate that to your patients, and what's their reaction? Curiosity, confidence, concern, and has it changed how they engage with their care?
Yeah, so I wish more patients used AI, I mean, because I love an educated patient. And
Right.
I think we'll get to the point where patients now Google what they have. I think in the future we're going to have patients that use AI instead of Google to
Hmm.
learn about the conditions that they have. And I wish more patients would be engaged to use it, because for the most part it is pretty reliable and pretty good at giving information about a topic or a disease state. Now, if you're drilling down into very nuance things like, injection frequency or drug choice, I think it could get muddied there because there's just so much misinformation out there about treatment choices and other things like that. And it's also, there's just not a lot of hard data comparing one drug to the other. So you might end up where AI is going out and gathering that information from chat groups or from, who knows, Reddit, whatever it may be trying to get the information from. But anyway, I digress. So I have found that if I'm going to use anything that involves patient information, I'm going to do it in front of the patient. I ask for permission from that patient. So prior to AI, I wouldn't hesitate if I had a patient that had a tough diagnosis or something that I wanted to learn more about, saying, "Hey, do you mind? I'm going to do what every good doctor does. I'm going to Google it." And I used to Google stuff in front of patients and say, "Hey, you know what? Let me learn a little bit more about this, because it's been a while since I did med school. And, let me see what the newest thing on that, or especially like with new drugs, because there's so many new drugs
Right.
out there. Say, hey, I don't know if that drug can cause that side effect, but you know what? Let me Google it and see." And so now what I'll do is I'll say, "Hey, listen, do you care if I use AI to see what ChatGPT thinks about this?" And obviously the patient says, "Yeah, I'd rather not." Then we'll say, "Sure, I'm happy not to use it." But honestly, you can do it in a way in which whatever information you upload is de-identified. So you take a picture that doesn't have any patient information on it. You give a description of the patient, but you're not going to put in their name and date of birth. So there's ways that you can do it, but always doing it in front of the patient and involving the patient in it. And then I'll say, look, this is what ChatGPT has said, about this condition. And I'll share it with them. And so I think it's a really neat experience to do that with the patients. And then whatever I'm doing outside, like, before I see the patient, if I'm trying to learn something about a condition, I'll just do that on one of our work computers. And I'll usually utilize ChatGPT and just pull it up right there and learn a little something before I go in and see them.
Hmm. So in the words of 80s hairband Poison, every rose has its thorn. Uh, AI sounds amazing, but it's obviously not all magic. What are some of the risks, limitations, or even some annoying things about using AI in an ophthalmic practice that you've learned and can share with some of the folks that are tuning in?
Yeah, so we mentioned the hallucinations and kind of the
Right.
confabulations. I mean, you got to be very skeptical of things that don't sound right. You want to fact check things. I think sometimes getting it to give you the information that you want can be a little bit tough. I think there's oftentimes, if you want to do a thing and ChatGPT has it, Grok has it, a variety of others have it, it's a deep search. You can really mine a lot of information about specific topics by doing a deep search. That takes a lot of time. So that can take 10 or 15 minutes and it will generate a huge report of information. You might not have time to sift through all of that. I do worry about, all of the potential additional garbage that can end up on the internet from AI. I think a lot of the content now that we have and that's being formulated on the internet is going to be AI, and AI is going to learn from that. And so we might end up with a, kind of rapidly deteriorating system where there's more and more content that's by AI. AI is learning from more of that content, and it can be a downward spiral. Those are probably the biggest things.
Mhm.
I think it's getting much, much better at you asking it a question and it coming back with exactly what you want. One of the frustrations I had about a year ago was you would ask it for something, but it would come back and not be specifically exactly what you want. I think the other thing that's a bit of a frustration is some of my favorite websites have not embraced AI yet. And there's a
Okay.
little bit of a struggle to bridge that gap. And the big one I would love to see using AI, and it would be perfect for it, is PubMed.
Oh, yeah.
PubMed's such a great website. I've spent so much time on PubMed, searching for articles, reading abstracts, staying up to date on things. And I think it's criminal that PubMed did not have an AI-enabled version, because AI would be absolutely perfect for some of these literature searches.
So is there any, you mentioned not PubMed, but you mentioned several platforms, ChatGPT kind of being your go-to. You mentioned Claude, you mentioned Dolly and some other ones. Is there any ones that you would stay away from? For instance, I know that a couple months ago, there was a big buzz about, is it called Deep? It's got the whale as the
Yeah,
logo.
DeepSeek. Yeah, DeepSeek.
DeepSeek, yeah. So is that something that would be a good resource, or I mean, that or anything else that you would kind of stay away from? Like, maybe not that one.
I think it depends on what you're asking of it. If you're just asking basic questions, DeepSeek, and the big concern for DeepSeek is that it's an AI that's out of China, and worried about, hey, what kind of information is DeepSeek going to be able to gain from some of our queries and from using it. It actually was really revolutionary in a way, in that it utilized less robust processors. So this is a very processor intensive thing, AI is. And DeepSeek was able to find a way to do it without having the top of the line processors that are working on it. And they actually did it a lot cheaper. And I've used it for several things. It's on par with ChatGPT and
Okay.
Gemini and those things. But I tend to not use it as much, because it maybe doesn't stay as up to date. And I don't put anything personal into DeepSeek, just for those concerns over, personal information and
Right.
whatnot, which I will sometimes, utilize personal information and whatnot when I'm, writing letters or working on my CV with a known commodity like Gemini or ChatGPT.
Okay. So, in all practicality, if you were to list off the top 3 tools and platforms that feel comfortable with somebody just starting out and just nipping at the edges about getting into AI and bringing it into their practice, what would be the top 3?
Yeah, so I think I think you want to pick one and get really good at it, and
Okay.
I've been lucky that I've been able to play with different ones, and new one will come out and I'll dive headlong into it. But I would start with ChatGPT. I feel like it's one of those that has the lead. We're going to have GPT-5 come out soon, and that one I think is going to be a game changer. It's going to basically kind of leave the rest of them in the dust, at least early on. They all seem to catch up pretty quickly when one makes a major advance. But I would start with ChatGPT just as your basic, GPT AI, and really kind of learn the layout of that, learn how to do prompt engineering, ways that you can get it to do a variety of different things. I think it's the one that's going to be around the longest, or at least has the most robust platform in engineering. And it doesn't require, you can do the free version of it. There's a free version, there's a $20 version, and there's a $200 version of the ChatGPT. And if you want a little bit of additional early access to things, the $20 version is great. I mean, it'll let you do 99.9% of the stuff that you can do with the $200 version, and save a lot of money. If you're somebody that wants integration with your Gmail, right now, Claude is probably the best one. It
Okay.
has a plug-in that you can activate, and basically it will access your Google Calendar and your Gmail. I use it a lot for trip planning, for looking back through my Gmail to try and find things, for to-do lists and other things like that. I think it's really great. And then there's some really fun ones that you can use. And so I use MidJourney a lot for image creation, for talks and things like that. I love AI generated video. And so I'll use the VO3 or the Google Flow. Those are the same basic image or video generation platforms. And then for music, I'll use Suno or Udio to make AI music, because that's kind of a fun hobby that I have as well.
So, someone's ready to dive in. What's the first step? I mean, is it more of a hardware, software mindset? And I know you mentioned on a couple different occasions here during the conversation about prompt engineering. Can you tell us about that for somebody who really wants to kind of just hit the ground running?
Yeah, so first things first, you can do it with any hardware. You don't have to have any fancy computer to access this. It's all web-based.
That's good
So
news.
you don't need to buy a new laptop or anything, and most of these will actually have an iPhone client. So even if you just are mostly a phone-based person, you can get ChatGPT on your phone, or you can get Claude on your phone and start to use it right away. I love YouTube videos for resources. So Googling prompt engineering or how to use ChatGPT, one of the best YouTubers if you want to keep up on things and see some basic tutorials, Matt Wolf does a really great job there, but there's a few other, or many other actually, YouTube AI folks that can really do great tutorials. And then I'm currently taking a Google course on prompt engineering. And even though I'm a pretty good prompt engineer, I think it's nice to just kind of get some fundamentals down on how to do prompt engineering. So if you type in Google prompt engineering course, there's a free 8-hour course that you can take,
Hmm.
and that can really be a good entry. And even though it talks about Gemini, their AI client, it'll apply to any of the AI clients. So prompt engineering, for one, will get you set for prompt engineering for any of these.
So when you incorporate AI into your daily operation of the retina practice, how do you do that without it becoming a burden or distraction? And are there any best practices or habits that keep things running smoothly with this in place?
Yeah, no, it's a huge distraction. I got to admit, it's one of those things where when I'm in clinic, it's a massive distraction for me. So if I start to get, we see a lot of patients, and although AI helps, sometimes if you really start to go down a rabbit hole, or you've seen something that it'll do that's new or different, or you have a different idea that you want to try out, you can get so focused on that I'll have my text saying, "Hey, are we going to start to work today?" So it can be a big distraction when you really start to figure out these things that you can make it do. But that also is very energizing from that standpoint. So I think having a good balance, we all have a little bit of downtime between patients that we can sometimes utilize to try and, play around and see what types of things we can get this to do. But for the most part right now, I mean, I'm using it for adjunctive things that help me educate patients, better treat patients, and educate myself about the things that we take care of. So I haven't really started to use it, nor do I think it's ready for prime time when it comes to actually managing patients and how we take care of patients.
Okay.
For the most part. For mysteries, sure. For the kind of random, question about a potential clinical study, great. But for the most part, I think that it's something that's right now education for me and for patients. And that's really where it's kind of locked in at.
So I want to switch gears for a moment. You also are known for your creative eye, literally. I mean, you do the whole photography thing and the videography thing. Has your experience in these two skills helped you understand or apply AI in a different way in your clinical work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say probably not as much in my clinical work, but it has really helped me when I'm doing a prompt engineering for any kind of videos or anything creative that I'm doing. So as somebody who's done a lot of photography and has done a lot of videography and video editing, right now, if I'm going to give a talk and I want to use an AI generated video to kind of engage my audience or to explain a point, which, by the way, AI generated videos aren't the best when it comes to medical surgical techniques, but they're great for storytelling and they're great for engaging your audience and creating something that's going to kind of lock them in and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to pay attention to this now. So they're great to grab your audience, so to speak. What really helps is having some of that experience. And right now, you can't just type in a prompt, I want, a 15-minute video of a sailor, catching a whale, and I want this to then be the beginning of a explanation of macular degeneration or, proliferative vitreoretinopathy. It's not that good. What you'd have to do is make many small segments telling the story, and then I'd have to stitch those together in like a video editing software like DaVinci Resolve. I'd have to do some voiceover narration with it, and you can use a voice changing software that's AI generated through 11 Labs or one of the other softwares that can do that. And use AI to make a script, maybe give you some, shot sequences and some direction as far as like camera movements and whatnot. So there's pieces that you can use AI to put all of this together, but it's still not to the point where you can just type in a prompt and just have it happen.
Got it. So all right, crystal ball time. Looking ahead, where do you see, and you spoke to this a little bit ago, where do you see the role of AI going in ophthalmology over, say, the next 5 years? Are there any trends you're especially excited about or maybe even a little nervous about?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I think that the big one it's going to have is going to be image evaluation and interpretation. Right now we see patients, we do a lot of imaging. I think it's going to be instrumental in helping us to identify fluid for patients with wet macular degeneration or diabetic macular edema. I think it will be incredibly helpful for tracking geographic atrophy and identifying growth rates of geographic atrophy, identifying patients that might benefit from treatment and patients who might not benefit from treatment. I think those are low-hanging fruit that we may see in the next 2 to 3 years. Keep in mind, Spence, all of these things have to be FDA approved. So these algorithms have to be evaluated. They have to be presented in clinical trials to the FDA, and the FDA has to validate these things. So it's not just a turn it on overnight sort of thing. But I do think it's going to help us in those situations. I think it could also help us when it comes to planning how to treat patients, evaluating patients as far as what their insurance policies are going to cover drug-wise, taking a lot of the steps involved with prior authorizations for drugs and simplifying those so that we have answers quicker and maybe answers before we even see the patient as far as what treatments they're eligible for. I think we're going to see it synthesize larger amounts of information and show trends on patients over time. And I think it could also hopefully eventually tell us within the next 4 or 5 years, like, where are we missing things? Where are patients underperforming in our practices compared to clinical studies? It's amazing right now that we do what we do, but we never keep track of how we're doing. It's almost like a baseball player that they never keep stats on. You're going to go out there and think that every game you're 4 out of 5 and that you're doing fine. But there's no statistics to show, hey, wait a second, 5 games ago, you went hitless. And 2 games ago, you only had 1 hit and 6 at-bats, and your average is not actually 800. It's closer to 400, and you should do better compared to your peers. So I think that it's going to give us the opportunity to synthesize these large amounts of data to be able to have a better idea of, are we doing okay? Or am I under-treating? How am I doing surgically? Or do I have higher re-op rates than I should compared to my peers? And those things will be very, very valuable for us to utilize and learn from.
Well, cool. Hey, well, Dr. Kitchens, it has been an eye-opening conversation, absolutely intended. Your blend of creativity, tech savvy, and clinical expertise is a real inspiration. And obviously, you're very knowledgeable and really passionate about the subject. If any members of our audience wanted to reach out to you and really get more on the subject, where can they reach you?
Yeah, so just shoot me an email, jkitchens@gmail.com. That's the email that at least I check several times a day. Or if I don't check it, Claude does.
I love that. Well, thanks, Dr. Kitchens. Always a pleasure. You can come on this show anytime. As always, we'd like to thank Riverside FM and Passionate Media for making this show possible. That's a wrap for this episode of the Q-Switch Conversations podcast. Until next time, this is Spence, and I'm out.
You're listening to The Q-Switch with your host, Spence.